This project demonstrates some advanced cascading style sheet techniques as well as using links in different settings you can use with them. You'll create a portal page, something similar to this. It does not need to be styled like mine. You'll notice that I have this broken down where I have what appear to be buttons up at the top. These were created using CSS, and I'll show you the code for them momentarily. You need to have an image as a link. The code for that, you use your standard anchor with your href information, and instead of having text between the opening and closing anchor tags, you just put in your image information. You'll notice I'm adding an additional style that you haven't seen. This is a float. When we get into images in a couple of assignments, I'll explain it in details. Float left just makes the image float to the left and everything else move over next to it. You'll also have to put in a selection of links, and I want them broken down by category. And your on-page links here, if you click them, will take you to those sections. I've included a top button to return me to the top. Then I've also created a button to take me back to the Web 105 homepage. So let's take a look at the code to show you how it's done. I'm going to view my page source, and this is always a good idea. View page source, not page info, and I'll increase Control plus. On a Mac you'd use Command plus the font size to make this a little bit easier to read. So I have included styles, and you can see that as we start getting into styling, it can get really extensive, and instead of using inline styles, I've added all the styles to the top of the page. When you're doing styling, you put the HTML tag that you want to change, like body, here, and then you have inside curly brackets all the styles that we were applying. This is similar to using the inline styles where you did the style equal. It's the same information, but traditionally you'll put each style on its own line. The style will list here like color, then a colon, and then we'll have the color code. Then we've got our font family. I've styled the H1 tags, and the nice thing about pulling this out where I'm not styling each individual tag is that I no longer need to copy and paste my styles. This will apply to all H1 tags. I've styled the H2 tags, I've styled the anchor tags, I'm giving them a font size. An M is just based on the standard size of the letter M in a page, and by default the anchors will be 1.5 times the normal size. Font weight of 800, this is making it a heavier, darker font. I've got the color here with the text decoration of none. Then I've got for hover and for visited, and these are my codes for that. I'm going to separate these so we can have them side by side. And you can see a little bit what I'm doing here. So for my anchor, that's these. My standard color is blue. My hover color gives me the text decoration of an underline. You can see it turns pink and becomes underlined. And for a visited page, this was a page that I visited, it won't change colors on hover, but not to pink, it'll change to gray. Gray is a visited one. So if I were to go to Peloton, which is a color scheming site, and go back, it will be gray. That will show you that you visited the site. Now in the nav portion of my code, this is my nav area, and in my HTML I have the container H1 links and buttons, and then I have my nav in here. So each link in here is in my nav section. You'll notice that they have a hashtag or pound sign that simply refers me to the same page. Each link will take me to an ID on that page. So I have an ID images. If I click on the image link, I go to the portion of the page with the ID of image. Let's go look at how we styled those, because those are styled to look like buttons. So first of all, I've used the nav section to align everything text line center. That's why these buttons are centered. Then I have my anchors in my nav section. I've put a padding of 5 pixels and 10 pixels, which means that there's 5 pixels above and below the text and 10 pixels on the end, because it's always up and down then side to side when you're using two tags here. The margins are the space between my buttons and the surrounding areas, so I have wider spaces between the buttons and the buttons to the side than to the line beneath them. The background is dark blue. The border is the same color of dark blue, and I did the border so that if you mouse over, the border is in place but the color disappears. Border radius of 5 pixels is giving you this slight curve to the corners. Text decoration of none. Unless you hover over, there's no underline. Actually, this one has no underline at all. And a font weight of 700, which is fairly heavy. Font weights range from basically 0, which is not there, 100, 200, up to 1,000. So this is a heavy font, but not the heaviest one you'll see. And then the color is white, and that's the hexadecimal code for white. Visited color is still white. That's actually not really necessary. I was playing with a few different things. We could have gotten away from that on the visited. I did not want to show the visited to have different things in the button because it all looked like that because it's on the same page. Now with my hover, the background turns to white. The color, that's the font color, turns to blue. The text decoration is none. It's because it's inheriting from the traditional hover, not just the nav hover, which is the same reason I've got the white here, is because they would have picked up the attributes from the plain links in our page. We're modifying so that when we use nav space and identify these styles only impact links that are inside the nav area. But you have to sometimes do things to override the standard nav styling, which is why we have things in here that really you wouldn't think would be necessary. But if you don't do that, then the visited color from here will carry through, because cascading style sheets, the cascading means that they're inherited. So I have what's called a container. I use container frequently. It allows me to separate the page. I don't always put a border around the container, but I wanted you to see how the container was being used here. We have this container, it's set to a maximum width, and it will stay centered on the page. I could have put all of these in one container. It can be used that way, or I can have separate containers for each sections. Both are completely valid ways to use containers. And then I've styled the container so that it has a 0.5 pixel solid border of a light gray. That's this. Padding of 15 pixels. Padding is between the border and the interior content. Margin is between the border and the exterior content. So the margin is 15 pixels, bottom and top. It collapses here. It won't double into 30. You'll just get 15. I've got a maximum width for my border of 960 and a minimum height of 50. Now that is a maximum width, which will allow you to do some scaling and resizing. We aren't really responsive yet. You can see it's not really designed to be a responsive site. We don't know enough to do that well, but it's slightly responsive. It lets you adjust the size up to a certain point with a maximum width. I'm also using a clear both. When I get to the images, I have floated the star to the left, and any new container I typically want to clear previous floats so that we go back to the normal way that the page flows, which is one item after another from top to bottom. A float disrupts that, so you have to clear it when you want to return to the standard way of putting pages together. I have overflow auto because I have caused a problem when I use the float with the image. If I don't use the overflow statement, I will have the star showing over the line of my container, because again I'm breaking the normal flow and it no longer knows where the star ends. I've set a line height of 2 just because that's the spacing that I wanted. Padding 0 top and bottom, 15 pixels left and right. Margin bottom 10 pixels. These are my paragraph formatting. That was trying to get my alignment for how, if I'm adding additional text, how that would look here. I have a footer. I'm just aligning that to the center. I was trying to do the vertical align middle. That didn't really work the way I wanted it to here, so that code is pretty much redundant. And then I have code just for representing my code. This isn't something that you'll need to do, but I'll show you where it's applied. I've put a slight background color and made the code slightly darker and larger than it would normally be here to make it stand out as computer code instead of a normal paragraph. So those are the styles. Soon we'll be taking the styles to an external page, and you'll see that there are advantages of internal pages versus external pages. Typically, I only use style sheets on the same page when I am doing an HTML email. An external style sheet is more appropriate if you are having multiple pages with the same styles, and that is commonly the way things are done. Let's look at the HTML quickly. So I have the page here, and at the top I have links to spots on the same page. So I can click programming. It will take me back down to my programming links that will appear at the top of the page. I can go back to top, usability, that will appear at the top of the page. Design, and that will, there's only so far it can scroll, that will appear in here. So I'm going to hit back to the top. And each of these links is a link to a spot on the same page. So it's a spot to a named ID. An ID can be used like a class for styling, but the most important thing about an ID is that it uniquely identifies one spot on the page. We'll use this two ways. We'll use it when we're doing links to a specific spot. We'll also use it in later classes if you were to program the HTML using JavaScript. You'd uniquely identify it there. The links you've seen before, the code here, this is a little goofy because we can't use HTML codes and have them print on the screen. You have to go and get codes to represent the HTML code. So the ampersand QUOT semicolon is a quote. You've seen that before. There's various ways of representing that, but you may need to get the ASCII references if you're trying to do something funky like code rather than just text. The only other thing that's really you're going to see here is that we're opening to a new page when this goes to an external site. So if I want to go to Code Academy, which is a great resource for getting some extra practice with HTML and CSS, and I'd encourage you to do that, and it's free, it opens in a new window. It's normal when you are creating web pages to have a page that goes to an external site open in a new window. If it's a page from the site that you're currently on, it typically replaces the page you're looking at. And to do that, you add the target equals underscore blank. And you can do it this way, or you can have quotes around the underscore and blank. Both work. You'll notice I put my link back to the top here. I have an ID right here at the top of the page in my header class. So these are all pretty repetitive, just giving you links to other areas. Each section I've separated into a container. That was a styling choice. It was not necessary, but I wanted to visually separate my different resources from programming, usability, image resources, and so those have lines around them, and I use the containers that way. You can absolutely do that. Again, it's just a visual choice. You could use one container for the entire page and eliminate the border if you don't want it to be visible. So let's talk a little bit about how I'm sharing this information with you. If I go into Canvas, you'll see links in the assignment. And I've been embedding source code from GitHub throughout the course, but it's getting to be to the point where the code is too long to do that. So where it works fine for simple short pieces of code, it doesn't work as well for larger pieces of code. I'm using a website, which you'll start using next module, called GitHub. And GitHub is used for managing code. So you'll notice that when I share code with you, I've been sharing it traditionally in the last few sections by just putting up a sample of the code. This week's sample does not contain all the code, and it's getting long and hard to read in this format. So I've included a link to GitHub where all of the information is stored. And if you click this link, it will take you here where I have all of the code. So all of my code is in my GitHub repository, and you can see the entire page, or you can always right-click and view source. When I've been sharing code snippets, I use the gist area or gist area, and that lets me put in just a piece of the code for you to see. Unfortunately, with code wrapping, this doesn't always work as well as seeing the full code, but you can go in here, and you can also scroll over if you want to avoid some of the tabbing and see all of the code here. This is what's being embedded into Canvas. In the future, I will just include the link to the website for GitHub so you can go see all of the code there on the site. This is what it'll look like. If you click that, it will take you out directly where you can open up any of the files, because we will have multiple files when we go to whole sites, and this is an easier way for you to see the code than simply right-clicking on a given page. Well, that's it for this assignment. Don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions.